Hi guys, another video. What I recommend is read the descriptions below. Those have a lot more information and clearer descriptions of what I'm saying in the video. I'm just mumbling a couple of other things on top of that. Some details you might know, some you might not. But anyways, let's kick it up. So now we just finished the hosting options that we have on Azure. Now what I'm tackling is the storage account requirements. So on any plan, function app requires an Azure storage account which supports blob. So the storage account, Azure storage account that supports blob, queue, files, and table storage. This is because functions use storage for operations such as managing triggers. So what is storage used for? It's used for managing triggers and logging function executions. So storage accounts that do not support queues and tables are excluded. If it does not support, this is key. If it does not support this, this is then it is excluded or filtered out when existing storage account selection. Okay, this is excluded out when you are creating an app, essentially, when you are creating a function app. Storage account filtered out or include zone redundant storage replication, blob only accounts, general purpose storage accounts. Now I'm particularly confused because if blob only type of, those are more of your premium storage accounts. If those are taken out, I wonder, and general purpose is taken out as well, I wonder which one we're going to use. Standard, but standard to me is the standard general purpose one. But we'll see. Can use the same storage account to store. You can use the same storage account to store application data, right? So data that users give you or whatever that you process, the results of your process, and function data. So function data is that data that we talk about managing triggers and logging function. But this can be risky when the app data is high. So if we have a lot of application data that we processing, so imagine we're processing, I don't know, 1 million records a day or something along those lines, and we're storing some serious objects in those particular storage, then we run the risk of the application data needing some scaling. And if we use that for our functions, we might run into a risk where the storage account is full and our function cannot execute based on that. Cool. Scale Azure functions. That's another topic. We're going to talk about how to scale Azure functions. So instances on a consumption price plan are limited to 1.5 gig memory and one CPU. I think those type of questions, they like them in the Azure papers. So please take notes of these limits. I'll add it on the description as well. All functions in a function app share the same instance, and scale at the same time. So you can have multiple functions, right? Multiple functions in the same function app. So one function app can contain multiple functions. Functions app that share the same consumption plan scale independently. So if a function app shares the same consumption plan, so both of them are on a consumption plan or something, but the functions apps are separate, you can effectively scale those independently. Number of instances is determined on the number of events that trigger the function. So if we have high number of events, that means we'll have high number of instances. Azure function code files are stored in Azure file share. So source code that we have for our Azure functions is stored in file share of the function's main storage account. If deleted, cannot be recovered. So if you delete your source code, oh shit, function doesn't work. Sorry for that. Very useful language, but yeah, that's what I wanted to get across. Azure function use scale controller to determine when to scale in and out, right? They have what? Something called a scale controller to determine if they need to scale in or out. The scale controller uses a heuristic for each trigger. For example, if triggered by a queue storage, it checks the length of the queue and the oldest message on the queue, right? So it uses heuristic for each trigger. So if we have functions in our function app that are some are triggered by queues, some are triggered by a service bus, some are triggered by, I don't know, event hub, event grid. It will check those different heuristics for the different services and determine if the app needs to scale or not. The unit of scale of functions is the function app. So function app scales the functions. So if one function has, a queue that is being deadlocked, or it has a lot of items on it, it will scale the whole function app essentially. So those are some of the sources that we can use uh, to actually scale our functions. So as more and more information we have here, the queue, the longer the queue is, the service bus, similar type of thing. If we are getting a lot of blobs coming in, then we'll start scaling. Then after your function app has been idle for a number of minutes, the platform may scale the number of instances on which your app runs down to 0. The next request has the added latency of scaling from 0 to 1 instance. This latency is referred to as a cold start. So that means if there are no requests going to our function will ultimately result in 0 instances. Once we get once it's on 0 instance and we get a request, because the function has to start up and all of that, the first request will experience a latency, which is called a cold start essentially. That's what cold start is. Then we have scaling behaviors, right? We have few intricacies of scaling behavior to be aware of, right? Few of them include this maximum instances and this new instance rate, right? So we say a single function app, let me just make this explicit. A single function app can only scale to 200 instances. Single instance can process multiple concurrent requests at the same time, right? So an instance can process multiple. So think of about your API and how it's hosted, let's say on IIS or whatever the case might be. You can throw in around about 1,000 requests by default, and it will be able to handle those depending on other things like your database performance and da 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 da. So similar to a function. So a function instance itself, one function instance, function app instance which has a function can process multiple requests at the same time. But then now when we add an additional instance, now we have two function apps running at the same time, identical code. Those can, process multiple requests independently. So that multiplies our number of requests that we can handle essentially. New instance rate. New instance rate allocated for HTTP triggers at least once per second. For non-HTTP triggers, once every 30 seconds. For faster scaling, use premium plan. So if you want to scale faster, use a premium plan. Otherwise, consumption plan, no, because we were talking about cold start and the likes, you start experiencing that. So those new instances are allocated for HTTP triggers, it's per second. For other triggers, every 30 seconds. Essentially, that's what that statement is saying to us. Then we can limit scale out. When downstream components such as databases have throughput limitations, you can limit the number of scaling instances, which we can do that by use or set function app scale limit to limit the use of 0 or null for unrestricted. So that's that. We use a property called set function app scale limit to limit the instances if our database is just having a rough day. Otherwise, if we put a 0 and null, it will be unrestricted and the function will just scale however and whenever it pleases. Coolio. Then next section will be that develop Azure functions. Thank you very much. Let me cut it here and put the notes for you guys.